Hi, I'm Pete, and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm Sunday edition. First of all, I want to get one thing out there. The channel crossed 100,000 subscribers the day before yesterday, and it's a goal that I've been aiming towards for a long time now. I am so appreciative to you all for the growth in the channel and subscribing, and I can't express how grateful I am. The second thing is, last Sunday I put out a video where I asked if it would be appropriate to focus Sunday videos in a kind of quieter way, more talk, I guess, about how to start a small farm, if you have a small farm, how to grow your small farm, or how to make it function maybe more profitably. And I got amazing feedback. I think there were over 500 comments, a wealth of ideas of things to do. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm calling it Small Farm Sunday. So you can sit down with a cup of coffee, watch the video, and maybe get a better idea of how to run your own small farm or start your own small farm. Out of all of the ideas I got, I think the one that struck me and the one I'm going to start with is farm infrastructure. Besides buying land, which is a whole separate discussion, farm infrastructure, I think, is the thing that bamboozles people the most when they are looking at buying a small farm. So you drive by a farm and you see all this stuff built out, fences and barns and equipment, and oh my gosh, look at all that money and all that work to put it in, and where do I start? I think that when you're faced with a huge thing like that, it can be just numbing. It can be paralyzing, and I want to give you some advice on how to approach starting with a blank slate. And I'll show you what we started with to begin with. When we started on this land, nothing was here. The house, the front part of the house was here, but it was a wreck. It was pretty much just a shell with almost no roof on it. None of these buildings were here. This old pole barn back here that my dad built about 40 years ago was here, but there was nothing in it. I mean, it was kind of just filled with junk, old tractor and stuff. So it wasn't set up to be a quote farm barn. None of this fencing, none of that big barn was here, and the garage wasn't here. And when we started farming in 2013, it was pretty much the same. I mean, I built out the house or renovated the house, put the addition on, built the garage, built this little shed. We had this garden because we used to keep a good big garden before we got so busy with livestock, and we had this old barn, but there was nothing else. It wasn't a farm. It was us living in a house and then renting the land out when the land was a blank slate. We rented it out to a soybean farmer. There were no fences or anything on it. So here's how we started. About 2 years before I left my old job, I decided I wanted to keep chickens. So I built this overly elaborate chicken house here, this little pitched roof structure to keep first half a dozen and then a dozen laying hens, and I built this run attached, and that was our first effort at farming. I think I spent about 10 years worth of egg production. I'm going to get to this. 10 years worth of egg production and money to build that house, which was a mistake, but I wasn't in it for the money at that time. Now, soon after I left my job, I decided I wanted to start a farming attempt with pastured broilers, meat chickens. And the very first thing I did is I built 2 of these boxes. And this, as I said, is a great way to get started in farming. It cost me, gosh, in today's prices, I don't know, but back then, 8 years ago, probably $300 in lumber, and I used salvage metal that a neighbor gave me. I've got a whole other video on how these boxes are built. They're just straight Joel Salatin style boxes. With a minimal investment, I started growing broilers. Never mind that, I had a little mishap with the tractor. It happens to the best of us. A few months after I started running broilers in the field in those boxes, we started running pigs behind the barn here, and this green addition wasn't here. All I did was I built a fence just like this one out of 2x4 welded wire mesh and T-posts and there was no electric wires on the bottom, as I remember, just the welded wire and T-posts, and I built a little yard here for the pigs behind the barn, and we got 3 pigs and ran them in there. The only investment I had, again, was just the fence. It cost me almost nothing. About 4 months after we started the farm, I decided I wanted to start some cattle, so we bought our first 3 Dexters. Now, none of this fencing was here, of course, and all I did to start out was I fenced this little field. It's about 2 acres, and actually we were running the broilers on this field too at the time. And I bought a couple lengths of Premier One Electronet, the fabric fencing you pull up, and I used that to divide the cows from the chickens and kind of follow one after the other. And this is all we had. This was the only planted field we had. The rest of the land, like I said, was all in soybeans. And over progressive years after that, we gradually took this land back from the soybean farmer and planted it into pasture. I think it took us 3 or 4 years to actually get through all the land, take it all back from them. Now, regarding equipment, we didn't have any. I had a couple old tractors because I liked messing around with tractors before we had the farm, but I didn't have any implements for them. We had cattle. We didn't need any tractors actually for the chickens and the pigs. You know, it was all handwork, so there was no investment there. It's the cows, and you'll find this theme through a lot of these business videos. The cattle are what costs the money. The cattle are why we build all these fences and barns and have to buy all this machinery. You know, hay binds or disc binds or however you're going to cut the hay, and rakes and balers and wagons, and that's all cattle. By giving you the example of how we started out, the thing that I really want to convey is you can't eat that pie all at once. Infrastructure is expensive, so psychologically as well as for your wallet, just break it down into what you want to start with. In my case, it was a few layer hens, and I could have built their coop a lot more cheaply. Heck, chickens are really forgiving. You do not have to heat their coop, insulate their coop. If you're in a cold winter climate like ours, all you need to do is keep the wind out of the coop. The chickens are just fine in the cold weather in the winter. They just need shelter, a place that the rain and the wind don't get into, and you're good. But anyway, I overspent on that. But for the broilers, you know, it was just, okay, in one weekend, I built these 2 broiler boxes. I didn't spend a lot of money in it. And for the pigs, it was just a fence. I took it enterprise by enterprise. And those of you who are not familiar with the idea of farm enterprises, in our case, each animal that you raise is a separate farm enterprise. So we have the chicken enterprise, the pig enterprise, the cattle enterprise, and it's important to keep track of how much you're spending on infrastructure and other expenses versus how much money's coming in by now I forgot the word myself by enterprise, because that way you know if some animal's having to carry the weight for another enterprise and where your profitability lies. Anyway, if you do that, if you start minimally, you can realize a profit on your first go round. So with the first batch of broiler chickens that I sold, I paid for the infrastructure I'd invested in. With the first batch of pigs, those 3 pigs that I took to market and sold by the cut, I paid for that fence, which cost me almost nothing. If you were to set out and say, well, I want to farm, and you have a blank slate like we did, and you went through and you built all that we have, you'd be in hock for the next 5-10 years at least. You have to start just with what you need. And then comes the next step. The next step is what I call infrastructure improvement or infrastructure redesign, where after you get a feel for how you're going to raise animals and the best methods that work for you, then you can go and build out your permanent infrastructure. So in our case, you're looking at it. We build permanent fences like this with wood posts and woven wire mesh, and they're kind of cow and calf proof for our winter fences. Here's another one over here. We didn't build these until our 5th and 6th year into farming, because we didn't know until then exactly how we wanted to run our cattle in the wintertime. And this barn is another example of probably actually 3rd or 4th phase infrastructure build out, where our cattle herd progressively grew and we needed more hay storage and more equipment storage. So we built this barn. But if you start at step 4 or step 5 instead of step 1, you're really not going to know what you need, and you're going to wind up wasting some of your money on systems that you're going to have to reconfigure later on. Even so, with all that build out we've done in 8 years of farming, all that build out's really concentrated back here, clustered around the house where we can get to it easily in the wintertime. The hay barn, the winter cattle barn, the winter chicken house, all the heavy duty winter fencing is all right back there. The vast majority of our land has almost nothing on it. It's all just these T-post and 2-wire fences, which are really easy to build and really quick to build. We can fence a field this size, which is 5 acres, in a morning with these. Pull them up, move them around, and not only are they cheap, but they're easily reconfigurable. So we didn't know how we wanted to graze cattle when we were just starting out. We had to do it for a couple years to figure out the best method for us. And I covered this last summer in a lot of videos, but what we do is we mob graze our cattle, where we move them to fresh pasture or paddock once a day, and we have a set of temporary fences. And the way we organize it is we run the fences in slots or strips, where we're kind of leapfrogging down the field every day and closing off the land they were on. It turned out, I didn't know this in the beginning, and I would have screwed up if I built all of our fence right from the get-go, that a field that's about 200 yards wide works best for that, because it's easy to move a lateral fence that far. If the field went all the way down to that hedgerow way down there, we wouldn't be grazing that way. So we set our fields up that way, but we didn't know that on day one. So that's why it's important to start small, find out what works for you, and then expand it. And obviously the other advantage to this whole approach is you're not shelling a lot of money out of your pocket right from the get-go. You're kind of shelling money out as it comes in. So you build something cheaply, you make a profit off what you raise in it or use it for, and then you can reinvest to make your infrastructure better. Plus, it helps keep you from getting stymied by the thought of doing the whole thing at once and not knowing how to plan your farm from the get-go. You should know how to plan your farm from the get-go, because you got to get a feel for how your animals will work on the land and how your methods fit best with what you have. And some of the things you come up with when you're working on the cheap, when you start your farm, will stick through you the whole way, because you think, hey, I found something that really works well for me and I'm just going to keep using it. One of these is these trash cans. We got them all over the place, and it turns out that one of these standard size galvanized trash cans, which you can buy for, I don't know, 20 or 25 bucks, will hold almost exactly 100 pounds of feed. So if you're growing chickens or pigs and you're buying bag feed, 2 bags of feed, fill one of those. So when we started raising chickens, I think I had 4 or 5 of these, and I would go get my week's supply of feed, dump it in the cans. Usually we would put a little tape on the bottom, because usually there's a little crimp for the handle here to keep the water out of them. And they're waterproof. The feed never gets wet in them. The rats can't get into them. It works really well. However, one of the problems with using garbage cans for feed is they're heavy and hard to move around, right? They're 100 pounds. So a couple of years into our farm, I wanted to think of a portable feed solution for not a whole lot of feed. Again, we're talking about a week's worth as I was buying bag feed. And these gorilla carts you can find on sale all the time at farm and home stores. So I decided to modify some of them to hold feed, and I'll show you how they work. All I did was I built a plywood box on the top, and I caulked the seams so water couldn't get in. There's no coating on the plywood or anything. It's just 1/2-inch plywood. And then I made a sliding top for them. So there's rails here, and then there's a rabbeted piece, if you can see it in here, that wraps around that and holds the top on. Top's just a piece of steel. These carts have been through a lot of thunderstorms with winds in the summer, and they don't get very much water at all in them. The step-by-step example I gave of rebuilding your infrastructure as your farm grows applies to the feed too. Trash cans to gorilla carts to bigger carts, gravity wagons. So as our farm made more money and we were able to reinvest, I was able to pick up used gravity wagons at auctions and from private owners. You're going to pay $1,000, $15 for one that isn't rusted out, that is in decent shape, won't have the best tires on it. These things work great. I order tarps online because you can't get good tarps locally anymore. These things have been on here for 5 years and running and never leaked. I just build a gabled set of 2x4s on the top to hold the tarp, and it's an easy way. The feed can go anywhere it wants, and then you can make the big step of buying feed in bulk and saving a lot of money on your feed costs. Now let me come back to my initial investment, the chicken house. Remember I said that that was a really poor investment, and this is why. Whenever you spend money on infrastructure, it's good to think about how much of your product you're going to have to sell just to make that investment back. So here's an example. I get people telling me all the time on my channel, they're always full of great ideas, you know. Oh, you should buy a skid steer to move manure. A brand new skid steer is in the range of 60 grand. I could pick up a used one probably for 10 grand. I'd have to work on it and all that comes with it. But I put it in these terms. How many cattle am I going to have to sell and make a profit off of to pay for that skid steer alone? Whenever I do that, I say, it's not worth it. You can put that through the lens of all the infrastructure. I hear of people spending $10,000 to $20,000 just on fencing. And I'm thinking, how long are you going to be in the hole on beef just to pay for that fencing? So if you're going to invest in infrastructure, figure out how much animals you're going to need to sell. It's the same with butcher facilities. I mean, we could put in a Cadillac butcher facility and never make our money back. The next certification up from the way we do it, the on-farm butchering the on-farm butchering exemption is a facility with lavatory and completely enclosed and its own septic field and well tests and all these requirements. I'm never going to butcher enough chicken just to pay for that facility. So it's a good lens for a small farmer. I sure do love listening to cows eat. My philosophy on infrastructure is to just do something, not do everything. If you do everything, you're going to mess it all up when you're just starting out. And do something, and most importantly, do it on the cheap. Don't invest a lot of money in something that's going to change, and wait till you see your profit come back till you invest more in infrastructure. That's the only way you're going to keep the ball rolling on your farm. If you go out and borrow and spend a whole lot of money, you're starting out in a hole. If you build a little piece of infrastructure with your own pocket cash, and then you see your profits back come in, you're building a hill. It's as simple as that. And you always want to stay on that hill when you're on a farm, so you grow when you have the cash. You don't grow by borrowing money. I know that this is completely counter to what mainstream farming has been doing for decades now, which is going out to borrow money to grow. We followed just the opposite, and it's worked out really well for us. Not to mention, there's a whole lot less stress involved when you're not worrying how you're going to make a bank payment or pay the mortgage while you're waiting for the money from the pigs you sent to slaughter to come back in from pork sales. It removes all that stress. So I hope this video is informative. I think with this series I want to kind of walk through these beginning steps of starting a farm first as a good foundation for later talks. I hope you have a great Sunday. Enjoy your coffee if that's what you're drinking, and I'll see you next time.